Thanks. Yeah, so I was invited today really to talk about the kind of data we've got. And yeah, again, just to really try and get it out there and to see if there's an interest in using it, or how we can derive more value from it, really. So yeah, the overall structure is I'll introduce the company. We've been on Compass for a while now. Probably a lot of people don't know what we do or some of the detail of the data we've got. I'll talk about the data that we have and how we collect the data and analyze it, and some of the things that we actually do with it to create some value, and some of the things we are still trying to do better with it, I guess. So Gaist was founded about 13 years ago now. It was by our current CEO, Steve Birdsall, who has a history in road surveying. He infrastructure surveying in general. He famously surveyed all the railway in the UK. And when he moved to roads, he quickly realised that the data that was being captured about roads was really not that useful to the people capturing it, to the highway maintainers. They were capturing it for reporting condition to central government, but it wasn't really useful for their day-to-day decision making. So that's when he founded Gaist to kind of try and really solve that. And back then we used to send people out with tough books collecting data on a tablet about the road condition, and we bring that back and to make it available to the road authorities after that. I joined Gaist about 9 years ago to really help make better use of that data. So at that point it was just data. They weren't getting any insights from it or anything like that. It was just used to make decisions on the day. And that's when we kind of introduced the imagery collection. So instead of sending people out on the ground, we developed a video capture system where we would send vehicles out to collect imagery, and then we'd analyse that back at base with a nice cup of tea where it's nice and warm. We don't make as many mistakes. As part of that, we started to generate insights from the data as well, and we started to do predictive modelling about the condition and the defects, and it's really just all evolved from there. The technology's got better and better. We're capturing more different types of defects, and our surveys are becoming more detailed. And our new system as well has a full 360 capture. We'll go into a bit more detail on that later. We're currently working with a lot of local highways authorities. I think 42 at the last count. Lancashire should be on there somewhere. Yep, there you are. So it gives us a good spread of data and a good coverage. Most of these local authorities we will create data for every year, and so we'll send a survey vehicle out and do the assessments. We also work with quite a few industrial partners as well. So you'll see your mapping agencies there, your tier 1 contractors, infrastructure operators, really anyone who's got an interest in the road and things we can see from the road. And finally, just as a bit of information about Gaist, we are working internationally as well. So we have vehicles in Australia and Japan. We've currently got one in Mexico, and we've been to Uganda and parts of Europe as well. So the kind of technology that we've got and the data we're collecting is not just applicable to the UK. It works worldwide. So what data have we got? The petabytes of data I alluded to was imagery. So we have about 1.8 petabytes of street level imagery, and the majority of that is from our previous generation system, which has a 5-camera setup. But our fleet now is transitioning to our new system, which captures 360-degree imagery. We also have detailed condition information about road and footway for most of that imagery. And this is really where we're creating value from that imagery at the moment by providing that assessment of the road condition to our local highways authority clients. The third area is in asset data, so street furniture, so bollards, grip bins, lampposts, all these kinds of things that are interesting to not just the highways authorities, but potentially anyone who does work on the roads as well. So fibre rollout, for example, planning where to put the fibres and what street furniture to avoid. And as of the beginning of this year as well, we also have access to dynamic data as well. So this is data coming straight off vehicles, being processed and then provided to us nationally. So we have access to that data for the whole of the UK and potentially other countries if required. So we have a lot of imagery, about 2.7 billion images in our database at the moment. And these span right back to 2013 when we did our first video survey. And this gives us a really good coverage of the UK and some international and some other countries as well. I think what's interesting here is we see kind of a cyclical peaks and troughs over the summertime and wintertime. This is because we only capture imagery when the conditions are good, so when it's sunny and bright enough and we don't have rain. And we live in the UK, so our winters are dreadful and we capture less data. But we're capturing anything between 40 and 50 million images per month on average. And yeah, like I say, this spans geographically across the UK and every single class of road as well. So not just your most traffic roads, but all your residential cul-de-sacs as well. So just some of what the imagery looks like, bit of a snapshot of it. We capture it throughout the whole of the UK, as I said. We have this front-facing camera, which gets us the kind of context. We also have a rear and a left and a right camera, but where our detail and where we extract most of our information from is from the carriageway camera, which is where we can see those really detailed defects on the road surface. So this was our old system. It's still in operation today, but we're transitioning over to a 360 feet now, where we capture imagery similar to Google Street View. As I said, we've got quite a history of data as well. So one of our oldest clients, Blackpool, we've got imagery dating back till 2013 here. So we can quite easily see transitions throughout time as well. If you look at the thermoplastics, the white lining there on the pedestrian crossing, you can see after a couple of years it's getting quite worn out. We can see transient roadworks, we can see signs. You can see now in 2018 it's pretty much disappeared. You can still just about make it out. 2019 they put some bollards up. I think that was in response to some terror threats. And in 2020 they finally repainted the road. But this just really shows the kind of value of having that time series data and the ability to after the fact see potentially what the reason for something happening was. Our 360 imagery is slightly different. We have a much higher resolution carriageway camera now, which is wider angle, but we also have the ability to capture 360 imagery like Google Street View, which is a lot more kind of lot more familiar to the average user who is used to Google, for example. One of the reasons for us capturing 360 imagery was so we could look up. Surprisingly, we've been quite focused on what's on the ground, what's the carriageway looking like. But recently, especially with fibre rollouts, there's a lot of people interested in what's going up in the sky. So on the telegraph poles, for example, how many wires are connected to it? Is there an electrical feed to the top of it, and that kind of thing. So we get the full context now with our imagery, which is allowing us to derive even more value from our imagery. We also have a technology called surface view. So here you can see surface view overlaid over some aerial imagery, and obviously aerial imagery only has a certain resolution, and once you zoom in it pixelates. But where we've captured our imagery, we can zoom right into the carriageway level detail, and this is really quite important for us. Street level imagery capture is only really usually accessible through their own interfaces. So if you want to look at Google imagery, you go onto Google Maps, and it's difficult to integrate into a GIS, for example. Whereas this view of the data, surface view, can be loaded into any GIS system, and it's a map layer that basically brings that imagery to life. So once we've captured imagery, we then turn it into condition data. So this is the road conditions in Aberdeen, and we do this on, well, I would say 99% of the imagery we capture. All the local authorities require this information to make decisions about maintenance, and this is the data that we're capturing. So if we look at it close up, you can see all the road segments we split into partitions where we see a change in the damage types or the defects which are visible, or the overall grade of the road. So the colours you see here are the overall grading, grade 1 red being the worst, sorry, grade 5 red being the worst, through orange, yellow, green and blue, which is good roads. And on each of these sections, we capture the defect types that we see visible in that area. So as I said, we capture 35 different defect types. And as far as we know, this is the most detailed condition assessment of a carriageway on the market at the moment. We also capture some other attributes, such as the overall grade of the road, so what's the overall condition, and they're broadly grouped into kind of functional states of the road, so as new, showing signs of wear, midlife, functionally impaired and structurally impaired. And then we capture things like damage width and damage area, which are again just based off the defects which you see. For a good number of our clients, we also capture footway condition. So again, very similar. We see we have the 5-grade system, and we have the material types and the defects. We also have information about the curbs as well, which is important for decisions about road maintenance. And again, I would say it's probably maybe half of our clients that would take up a footway survey. It's the less important one strategically to them. We also capture locations of assets. Again, this is probably an even smaller subset of our local highways authorities who ask for this information. We can extract anything that we can see from our imagery, but the ones we generally tend to do are quite common. Things like gullies. So drainage is obviously very important to a road, so having the locations of gullies is really important. And then finally, the dynamic data. So this is in partnership with a company called Naira, who work with Audi and Volkswagen. So I think it was any car sold after summer of last year will be fitted with this equipment, which will be able to capture the information. And that's then aggregated, anonymized, and made available for analysis. So here we can see the the current road condition of any road in the UK here. This is a much coarser measure of road condition. So what this is actually measuring is ride quality, so the bumpiness of the road. It doesn't give us any information about what kind of defects are there or the reason why that road is in a poor state, but it does give us an indication of changes, so we can detect changes in the current condition of the road, and then that could lead to investigation. We also get the slippiness as well, so this is important for winter scenarios. So here the local authorities can understand that if their gritting routes are being deployed successfully or optimally, and they can adjust accordingly if they see that certain roads are slippy when they shouldn't be. And yeah, we can do reviews of the winter gritting from this. And then the third source of information we get is weather data. So by certain aspects of the vehicle, we can infer what the weather's doing. So for example, if the windscreen wipers are on, it's probably raining. And we can also detect the speed of the windscreen wipers as well to see how harsh the rain is. The cars have temperature sensors in them. We can tell if their fog lights are on or if their hazard lights or their main lights are on. So we can infer a lot about the weather conditions from this data as well. So we get that on 15-minute snapshots, so we'll get an update every 15 minutes. And the road condition, the roughness index, we'll get a snapshot every day on that one. I think it's fair to say we're still understanding how we can use this data effectively, or how we can provide that data to our clients. We have this problem, or I guess for us it's a nice to have problem, but we could tell all our local authorities where their issues are from this data and from other information that we have. But as soon as they know about a problem on their roads, they've got a statutory requirement to investigate and then prioritise the maintenance of that. So overloading them with information is not a good idea, really. So some of the things we're doing with this data. We've got a team of data scientists who are looking into deep learning to automatically do a lot of the manual work that we're currently doing. So one of the things we're good at the moment is object identification within our imagery, and this is to replace the asset surveys that we do, or at least automate part of it. It may not be possible to do it all. So we've got algorithms and trained models to be able to detect lots of different asset types, and we have a good pipeline for doing that. But just detecting them isn't enough for us. We don't want to see boxes on images, we need to see assets on the ground. And this has been a kind of a second challenge for us, really, is actually making sure that that information is usable. So when we detect a pole, we need to make sure we're only reporting a single pole, for example. And there's two areas where this is a problem. The first one is where we drive past the same pole twice. We need to make sure it's this identified as the same asset. But also when we do a survey year after year, we need to know if basically that asset has been removed, or we just haven't detected it, or it's the same one. And that's quite a challenge for us. The other one is the mapping in the UK. So I don't know, you may be aware, but there's Ordnance Survey have Master Map, which is quite a detailed map of the UK, which is what you see here. They map road edges, curbs, houses, everything like that. But it isn't truly accurate to the real world. There's errors in it. So even if we had the perfect highest possible GPS precision, which was always 100% correct, our data might not always match up to the underlying base map, which is what our clients use to manage their assets. So we've got some interesting challenges around that one as well. The other area we look at is the defect identification. So, as I said, our surveys are one of the most detailed ones that we know about, and some of the defects that we're trying to identify are very rare. And again, looking through these imageries, you see the range of issues that we have to deal with. So different lighting conditions, different weather conditions as well. We do only survey when it's dry, but there's there still might be some patches of water on the road, and these are all kind of challenges we have to deal with here. So yeah, here you can see it's identified things like the reinstatements down the side of the roads. It's identified potholes which have been filled, ones which haven't quite been filled correctly. And yeah, it's about really trying to reduce the burden on our highways inspectors, so that they have to do less work and can be more productive and have a higher accuracy when they're doing their analysis. Another big project we've looked at, I think this was in 2018. We did 2018, 2019. We did this. This was a piece of work for the Department for Transport, where we assessed the condition of their white lines nationally. So using our data bank of imagery, we trained a model to be able to assess the condition of the white lines here, but not just the white lines, but also pictures and text. And we trained a model to be able to do that on about several thousand examples, which we'd annotated, and then we ran that on through our data bank. So there were 112,000 kilometers of data assessed, 146 million images. Took quite a long time, but actually, we ran several processes doing this, so we're able to turn around that processing in just a few weeks as opposed to months. And what that ended up with was a big snapshot of what the state of these lines and text and symbols was nationally. And this was really to help the Department of Transport understand, is this a problem which is distributed evenly throughout the UK, or are there certain hotspots or areas where there may be problems there? And how much of a problem is it actually? This was at the time when they were talking about big lots of hype around autonomous vehicles, and the Road Surface Treatment Association was talking about CAV readiness, so they wanted an understanding of the white lining. The results of this haven't been published, so there's no numbers on these, but from this we could see that there were general trends. On the whole, the lining was in a similar condition across regionally across the UK, but there were differences in, I guess, policy behind lining, and that kind of changed the prevalence of how much white lining we saw. More rural counties, for example, we would see less lining in, and the more urban kind of densely populated areas, we would see more lining. But hierarchically as well, we saw trends which made sense. Your more strategic roads, your more traffic roads, had more road markings, and they were in a better condition. They were maintained better than the ones. And again, this is without going into all the details behind the analysis and the report itself. It was really useful for the Department of Transport for making their cases for funding. And we repeated this survey as well again last year. One of the big areas, and one of the reasons I joined Gaist originally, was to develop deterioration models. So it's probably quite fair to say that the allocations of budgets to local authorities for road maintenance were fairly arbitrary. They were based off network length and not need or future need. And it was very difficult for local authorities to actually communicate and justify budget requirements. We developed models fairly early on to help with this. So just being able to ask questions about their roads and the effects of different types of funding meant that they could have the actual highway authorities could have different level conversations with their ministers to try and argue for more budget. So we developed early on some fairly simple probabilistic models, which basically estimated the probability of transitioning between different grades year on year to predict what the roads would look like in the future. And what this allowed them to do then was to try different scenarios out. So they could ask the system, what would happen if we increased our budget by, extra £2 million per year, for example. What effect would that actually have on the road condition long term? And these were questions they always wanted to ask but never been able to answer previously. So even with this simple model, they were able to get the answers to those and actually communicate and visualize those effects with their members. So off the back of this, we've got two really good case studies where Stockport were able to put together a business case to actually borrow money to invest into their road network to save long term. So, and these are big numbers. So Stockport, a relatively small local authority, they borrowed £108 million to repay over 25 years because they had the business case to show that in the long run they had better roads and it was more cost effective for the taxpayer. Likewise, Manchester City Council, they borrowed £150 million based off the data analysis that we did for them. So even with quite this was 6 years ago now, and even then with quite simple models we were able to show some really good insights into their data that they'd never seen before, and they're able to make some really big decisions based off them. More recently now, because we're getting more and more data and we're able to do more analysis, we're introducing other risk factors. So not just looking at the overall grade of the road, but looking at the defects which are visible, the maintenance history, information about traffic counts, and the geometry of the road, for example. And we're really trying to build up a really detailed model of how roads deteriorate across the UK. One of the other things we do as well, which ties into that quite nicely, is scheme identification. So I mentioned these bandings of different grades and defects. Again, this is probably a lot more detail than our local authorities want to see themselves. They want to know, they want actionable data. What can they do, or what do they need to do? Because they're not going to go out and fix every single one of those red squares there. So working with the highways authorities, we define rules and parameters around the grouping of these defects, and we group them up into schemes which they can actually then go out and action. And these may be really big schemes which involve the full reconstruction of the road, or they might be the kind of surface treatments which we see and everyone in the UK hates because it always closes down roads. But this again is something that is really useful for our clients, and something they have never had confidence with the outputs previously because they've never had this level of detail. It's always tied back to imagery as well. So once we say here's a scheme, this is potentially what you should be looking at, they can then go back to imagery and validate that. They can do their traffic management planning and all that kind of stuff. At the moment, we do this based off rules and parameters, but it would be interesting to see if we could try and learn from the historic data what makes a good scheme. And we haven't been able to do that everywhere because we just don't have that data yet, and local authorities don't keep good records of the work that they've done historically. But it would be good to be able to try and learn what makes a good scheme, as opposed to ask an engineer what makes a good scheme. This was some work we did in 2017, which kind of combined the data we produce with some publicly available data sets and some other data sets. This was for central government, and it was following the floods and the storm in 2016, Storm Desmond, I think it was. We were basically asked to work out which were the isolated communities in England, and this is because during those storms there were some communities which got cut off from the rest of the world, really, and were isolated. You couldn't get in or out of those places. So we combined a lot of the information that we had from our data about the different kind of restrictions on roads and the ability to get vehicles in and out of places with open data sets, and we did that analysis to work out using some flooding data if the floods raised to certain levels, which roads would be closed. I think during this week we calculated something like 160 million different paths across the UK road network to work out which ones were closed during certain levels of flooding, and that gave us different isolation levels for the communities in the UK. And again, this is quite some sensitive information here. We have to be careful with it because it could have all kinds of effects if it was open in the public. It could affect insurance premiums and all kinds of stuff. From that, we were able to generate heat maps where we could see where the general areas of isolation were, where there were potentially large sets of communities where there were issues, and where they were safe as well. And we could then make some recommendations about different roads where potentially, if there was funding available, they should be, the number one priority for flood resilience, really. And this again was something that the Department for Transport had never had access to, and it really gave the ministers that we were talking to the ammunition to be able to make their case for funding and to make sure these things are more resilient in the future. Interestingly, as part of that exercise, we worked out what the effect of closing every single bridge, I say closing, the effect of not being able to use every single bridge in the UK was. So this would be, for example, if during a storm or a flood a bridge was structurally unstable and they had to close it, which was the case in 2016. And this was the diversion actually which was put in place, and I think it was a 55-kilometre diversion for a single bridge failing. And again, we did this for every, I think it was 14,000 bridges in the UK that we did it for. And this again helped then pass that information on to the responsible highways authorities to then do the proper risk assessments and make sure that there were the things put in place so that didn't happen, and that if it did happen, they had the plans ready to mitigate against those issues. There was some interesting statistic about the bridge closed. I can't remember the exact number. I know Paula's on the call. I don't know if she can remember it, but it was millions of pounds per day in terms of the cost of having a bridge down. And this was only some small rural bridge as well. So these small kind of this small analysis really could have or mitigate very, very large costs in the future. So I hope that's given you a flavour of some of the things that we have and we do. We don't have a massive team of data scientists at Gaist. We have small teams, but they're focused on core business activities at the moment, and we think there's so much richness in the data that we have. We want to work with other people to explore that. So we're definitely looking for users of our data, and again, just talking to people outside of our field. There's hopefully things as well that we've never even thought about doing with our data. We're looking for help with insight. As I said, we've got this sensor data now. It's a beast. We're getting data for the whole of the UK every 15 minutes, and that's a lot of data to deal with. But we've also got our own internal condition data as well, which we need to kind of match up and marry to the dynamic data. And from that, we should be able to develop much more detailed and robust models. And I guess what we're offering is access to this data and the ability to talk to users of this data and internally our own users as well, and yeah, really to try and exploit that and to develop this relationship further. So yeah, thanks for listening. My email address is there. I think we've got some time for questions or discussions now, but if anyone has to drop off, feel free to send me an email.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was a really great talk. I mean, just kind of blown away with how much you could get from a, an image from a vehicle. I guess you've blown my mind there, because I would have thought, you're just taking a photo of, the road like Google Earth does, but actually it's quite incredible what you can do with that, especially like you said, once you get into the 360 degrees and thinking about all the applications, not just the road itself. In DSI tradition, I wanted just to invite everyone to unmute their phones and give Stephen a round of applause so you can hear the audience. Hopefully that came through. Do we have any, and some people are going for the virtual round of applause, that's also acceptable. Do we have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or just unmute to kickstart the Q&A.
I think you're on mute, Adam.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Yeah, I'll unmute. I'll get us going. One question I had, that I had many, but one that emerged was like, first I was thinking about integrating this data with other data, right? Like, you've already got tons of data, I get it, but to be more specific, like when you were going into like the flooding, coastal flooding and stuff, right? So you might have, data from meteorological data or data from coastal ocean, overtopping waves or whatever, like just things that you can't capture but others can, and like I guess like generally at a high level about integrating that data, and how easy that might be, and is there any scope for sort of like doing things more sort of online, real time with your data, that you could potentially combine it when you're making decisions to evacuate a coastal community or something like that. I don't know, these were sort of things that I was tangent, my brain was firing, and I don't know if you can make sense of my question.
Yeah, so definitely, and that's For the flooding piece that we did there, we definitely did that. So we had access to some flood models nationally, which we integrated with our data. I think more generally for the road condition analysis, though, I think there's definitely a scope to use external data sets there. We know weather does play a big part on road condition and the deterioration. And the thing that we have at the moment is an annual snapshot of condition. The dynamic data combined with real-time weather data and even real-time traffic data could provide some real insights there. For us, the question is, yes, we could do all this, but actually, are our clients, our local authorities, equipped to deal with that information? So, do they have the will and the resource to be able to do that? Do they want to change? And if they do, could they actually make that change? And we've seen historically, I think, local authorities are quite slow to react to change, but it's still something we want to investigate. And it's something we don't take into account with our modelling at the moment is weather conditions to some extent. Global warming is going to have a big impact on that, potentially longer term. And yeah, modelling the effects on roads would be really interesting.
Yeah, cool. And then, like, my second question. Oh no, we have a hand raised by Paula. I'll let you come in.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the comment that Stephen was making there about climatic change. We're already seeing some authorities where, particularly in Lancashire, where roads have been perhaps built on old reed beds, whereas they either sort of start to dry out or as they start to become flooded, it affects the substructure under the more rural roads. So when you start to scale that up across the country, that starts to be a real sort of challenge. And also that's an international challenge that's starting to occur as well. So our professional services team are sort of tentatively looking at data, but Stephen's right, it's an area that we don't fully look at just yet, and it is going to have some quite big implications.
Cool, thanks, Paula. It's really interesting. I was going to ask about like links with academia, which you sort of hinted at many, and it strikes me that there could even be like data people would want that they wouldn't even know that you could supply them with that, like you were mentioning about looking upwards from the cameras and you can see information about the the what was it, the wiring, but all sorts of sort of socioeconomic data. Someone might be randomly interested about how close trees are planted to the road, whatever. Like I can't think, they may have some research thing that they wouldn't have even thought that you could. They don't need to go and collect their own data and do expensive field work. That could be saved because this data already exists in some form. And I'm just wondering like how that dialogue could go, other than doing talks like this, right? And what would be the mechanism for how you would collaborate with academics on sort of effectively doing field work already for them?
That's a good question. So I don't have the answer to the first one. I think talks like this are great, and I guess I hope you talk to other academics and maybe that sparks conversation, but I'm open to suggestions on that one. In terms of what we can do, yeah, there's some great examples, and not a week goes by we don't think of something else. So prevalence of litter for litter surveys, graffiti, all that kind of stuff. You could quite easily get a good picture of these kind of issues and nationally from this data set. I think how we do that is another good question, which I'm not sure we've necessarily got an answer to. We've collected this data. We host it. Most of the cost has already been paid for quite honestly. And I think if we can work with academia to create more value from it, then that's fantastic. We do have a certain amount of resource as well, which is able to process or run processes on our data as well. So I think it would probably have to be on a case-by-case basis, but I would imagine for small proof of concepts and things like that, we'd be quite open to work with anyone in academia at no charge, depending on what it was for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting. I think it was last year Google actually changed their terms and conditions now, so they specifically forbid you to extract information from their imagery, and that's actually a lot of people were doing that, and it kind of cut that off as an option. So we don't want to do that. We obviously, if there's some value to be had, if there's IP being generated, then potentially there's some kind of share of that. But for proof of concepts and for evaluation, there's no issue with that.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. And I guess, like you mentioning before, you were exploring doing like placements and stuff with students and stuff. So you're looking to sort of support from that angle as well, potentially.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I think we've got loads of data, and there's lots of interesting things we can look at to combine with our data to add even more insights. And yeah, we have a core team who are looking at the kind of business critical stuff for us. But I think it definitely makes sense to collaborate with universities to do the more kind of hand waving, blue sky thinking stuff.
Yeah, cool. I could probably think of a lot of projects. I guess one thing that would be potentially overwhelming for like it could be anyone, but let's say an MSc student, you show them all this, millions of images and so on. Like, I guess, do you sort of already have software and packages in place that can kind of, like you said with the local authorities, you kind of needed to somehow simplify and dumb the information down a bit to make it accessible, because it's almost too rich to answer research. I mean, more data is always better, but not necessarily, and statistically it is, but not necessarily in terms of like how manageable it is. And how do you go about that?
That's a good question. So yes and no, I think is the answer to that one. We do have certain ways, and we've got standard processes which we can kind of help facilitate large scale analysis with. But I think on that one we'd be happy to have those discussions and talk in a bit of detail about requirements there. At the moment we have like standalone viewer for the imagery. It's just a web browser that you can look at the imagery through. But if you wanted to do large scale analysis, you don't want to be doing that over the web. And like I say, we've got some resources available to do that with third parties, but yeah, we'd have to work that one out on a case by case basis, I think.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Cool. Got a quiet audience today, but I'm sure there's lots of interest. Does anyone have any final questions? As you said, Stephen, you've got your email there, and I'm sure that we're going to be having follow-up discussions coming up, especially given that you have a base on campus. I think given that, I don't see any hands being raised. Thank you once again, Stephen. We can go for the virtual round of applause this time. Thank you again for the talk. And the next one in the series is in 2 weeks' time. We've got Robin Long. I've got the details up here, from Lancaster. He's a research software engineer at Lancaster, and he's going to be focusing on the N8 CIR, so it's the Northern 8 universities. So it's the research partnership, and CIR, it's computationally intensive research, that stands for. So it's I guess an initiative at promoting and facilitating computationally intensive research across the north of England. And Robin will talk about Lancaster's involvement and the Research Software Engineer Skills Development Programme, which they seem to be building. I don't know much